more relevant is the tarot card of death. I wanted to mention this because in all the various renditions, it is Hades that seems to be reflected. And you know that it's Hades because he's got his helmet on. A.E. Waite's card of death represents him as an equalizer. So everyone from the bishop to the king to the poor child, death is the great leveler. Crowley's image is very specifically planetary. He put it on the card itself, the sign of Scorpio, and associates it very specifically with Pluto. And I'm not going to pretend to understand all of Crowley's particular images, other than that he weaves webs like the fates. He weaves threads, and he's got a scythe, which is the property of Saturn, of course, in most ancient iconography. In the mythic tarot, Juliet and I very particularly tried to represent Pluto. And we even put in the sticks. And it was meant to represent death not as a literal phenomenon, but the many, many, many different forms of death that we experience all through life. What is it we're talking about when we refer to death? I mean, it's obvious in ancient iconography that death is when the body dies, hence the soul has to cross the sticks. But death is in our lives all the time on so many other levels, every time a phase of life ends and another one begins. And how we cope with that depends very much on how we deal with Pluto in our own charts. There's also, I think, an instinct to survive, which belongs to Pluto. And at the moment that we begin to experience a death of any kind, that survival instinct is triggered. I've already mentioned this, so I'll move on from that slide. So I'm going to move now into much more purely psychological domains here and look at some of the connections that I think are relevant to the astrological Pluto. The invisible realm of the underworld, I think, does have a relationship with what we call the unconscious. But it's not the personal unconscious. It's not the stuff that belongs to my childhood or your childhood, or something that is highly individual and part of an individual, pattern of unfoldment. It's what Freud called the id, in part, and Freud had a very interesting idea about the id, which was a universal, to him, a universal property of the human psyche. He saw it as composed of two quite distinctly different drives, one of which was eros, the drive toward fulfillment of life, pleasure, perpetuation, survival, and thanatos, which is the instinct to revert back to the original chaos out of which life first emerged. So it's generation and destruction, both existing paradoxically within the same realm.